In order to figure out the difference between patriotism and nationalism, use your history book, not your dictionary. Remember, the Patriots fought against the British. The Loyalists were too proud of their British heritage to ever want to secede. What we would formerly call loyalist can be more currently called nationalist. Patriotism rejects tyranny. Nationalism prides itself in tyranny, so long as the victims of said tyranny are people we don't like, or people we are told should be beneath us. Our word of the day: nationalism. It is not my job to make you feel good. It is not my job to make you feel comfortable. It is my job to inform you, to answer some of these questions about where we are, how we got here, and why enemies of yesterday harm the offspring of tomorrow, including their own descendants. It is intentional, not just by the efforts of the men who fought to defend the Confederacy, the men elected to office to terrorize black people with legislation, and the men who burned black communities they criticized as only being able to survive by taking government handouts. On a related note, the reparations neither political party wants to give the descendants of slavery were already given to the slave owners. So any black wealth generated in this country is not because the government that oversees this nation saw fit to adequately equip the people it claims it wants to be free. Black people did work hard and were not paid, and once free, worked hard once again and were burned and lynched for succeeding. Southerners have stood by their idea of patriotism since the end of the Civil War, as upheld in public by the men who protected white supremacy by terrorizing black communities, and the white women who made sure that anyone who learned about the Confederacy and the descendants of the defeated country never found out the actual history. The public stance of the modern daughters of the Confederacy is that anyone who uses the symbols and heritage of the Confederacy to promote racism and supremacy goes against what the Confederacy upheld. Well, the Confederacy's own Constitution upheld slavery for Negroes from Africa. Their words, not mine. So the daughters of the Confederacy appear to not know the history of their pride. Then again, nationalism tends to overlook faults to praise a faux greatness. Quote, "The history of the United Daughters of the Confederacy is fraught with interest. It is the chronicle of the patriotic work of Southern women, work that has expanded from the task of marking soldiers' graves to a comprehensive educational and historical program, which commands the interest and respect of thoughtful people everywhere. The record whose cause daughters all along is far-flung line to raise their hearts in gratitude to God for its wonderful preservation, and to make them more faithful and zealous in using the proper means for its further advancement." The Constitution of the organization states a few purposes, one of which says, quote, "To instruct and instill into the descendants of the people of the South a proper respect for and pride in their glorious war history, with a veneration and love for the deeds of their forefathers, which have created such a monument of military renown, and to perpetuate a truthful record of the noble and chivalric achievements of their ancestors, all with the view of furnishing authentic information from which a conscientious historian will be enabled to write correct and impartial history of the Confederate side during the struggle for Southern independence." Referring to themselves as patriots is a tactic often repeated by allegedly non-racist modern-day Confederates. I mean, conservatives. In the earliest years of the organization, the sisterhood began erecting statues of former Confederate soldiers and worked to find, quote, "unbiased school histories and endorsed such histories as are true to both sides, referring to the Union and the Confederacy. The name of this organization stems from a hospital built in Missouri to house disabled Confederate veterans, under the leadership of Miss A.C. Cassidy of St. Louis, identified as a patriot. She called the nurses at the hospital Daughters of the Confederacy, as first bestowed onto Verena Annie Davis by General John B. Gordon in West Point, Georgia, 1886. Now, as we have discussed, the Confederacy was created for individual rights, yes. States' rights, yes. The rights of individuals and states to own slaves, to own human property. The Daughters of the Confederacy worked diligently to advance education that portrayed, quote, a true, unbiased, and impartial school history of the United States in our Southern schools, wherein our Southern cause and Southern people shall be truly vindicated and set forth. Now, this is not a show about religion, but a reading from the Word on building monuments that edify men. Leviticus 19:4. Do not turn to idols or make for yourselves any gods of cast metal. I am the Lord your God. Exodus 20:4-5. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water below the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. Habakkuk 2:18. What profit is the idol when its maker has carved it, or an image, a teacher of falsehood, for its maker trusts in his own handiwork when he fashions speechless idols. Statues and monuments force the viewer to remember the alleged good of the depicted and not the evils and wrongs. Religion is the main driver for the misrepresentation of the history of the United States. Yes, you practice the religion of the overseer. Assimilation is not freedom. Religion guided these women to violate the scriptures, but even the Bible says that lying and building monuments will punish your offspring for generations. But I digress. The tactic for the United Daughters of the Confederacy was twofold. Quote, they knew monuments would speak more quickly, impressively, and lastingly to the eye than the written or printed word. Attract more attention. Their fundraising efforts to erect monuments across the country were just as minimal as selling pies locally, yard sales, hosting fundraising dinners, all for the purposes of erecting statues for traitors more than 30 years post-Civil War, because monuments will always confuse the viewer as to how great the immortalized figure is. The first chapters of this organization, Nashville, Tennessee, Savannah, Georgia, chartered on September 11, 1894, once again almost 30 years to the surrender of their fathers and brothers at Appomattox Courthouse in April 1865. Quote, the chapters of the United Daughters of the Confederacy have built hundreds and hundreds of monuments. Until now, nearly every county seat in the South has its Confederate monument in its courthouse square, or on a prominent corner, or in a cemetery, a shrine, a great object lesson to our youth, telling the story of a glorious past, of heroic deeds, of unfailing loyalty to a beloved cause. The Daughters of the Confederacy spawned a second organization, the Children of the Confederacy, quote, to unite the children and youth of the South in some work to aid and honor ex-Confederates and their descendants, and in doing so link the name of Miss Mary Custis Lee with her husband's, General Robert E. Lee. Mary Lee Custis is a descendant of Martha Washington, wife of the first President of the United States, and for the record, she is a founding member of the Daughters of the Confederacy. This, the Children of the Confederacy, Articles of Incorporation for the chapter in Louisville, Kentucky, quote, Article 3. The objects of this corporation shall be to organize the descendants of those brave and patriotic men and women who sacrificed their fortunes and some their lives in the courageous struggle for principles they believed of vital importance, and to keep from bias those who wish to know the true history of the United States and of the great Civil War in which the South suffered so greatly. They have convinced themselves and their children that they did nothing wrong, which is why the demand to keep the monuments around, the demand to keep their revisionist history in schools remains so strong. These organizations were not letting in too many dark-skinned members, and yet so many skin folk carry their banner for them without even being invited to join the organizations. How interesting. If we want to tell this story, let us be accurate in how we tell it, because the purpose of erecting the statues was to rewrite history. The purpose in demanding they be kept is to make sure that the Confederates are treated more fairly than the slaves they consider beneath them, their descendants included. According to their own history, even in Savannah, a major port in Georgia burned to the ground thanks to Sherman's march to the sea. They sought to erect a monument to the Confederacy as soon as the surrender was uttered to the Union Army at the Appomattox Courthouse, even before rebuilding their own city. You may be asking, are there black members of the Daughters of the Confederacy? Well, the answer to that question, unfortunately, is yes. The Confederate Congress passed a law in March 13, 1865 to allow black people to enlist. Up until that time, there were 0 black soldiers allowed to enlist for the Confederacy for obvious reasons. They were present on the battlefield, though, serving their masters with bullets a-flying and cannons a-firing. Slavery was so important to the existence of the Confederacy that while their soldiers were on the battlefield, the Confederate Congress amended their Constitution to say that no state or territory would be added to the Confederacy unless slavery was protected by law of the future state or territory. The Confederacy had acquired the land that would become New Mexico and Arizona during this time. In the Journal of the Confederate Congress, a compilation of the actions by the members of the Confederate Congress, which met in Montgomery and Richmond once again, slaves were referred to as from Africa, even going as far as referring to the slaves as, quote, that species of property. Some of this species of property had been required to fight on the side of the Confederacy, but others volunteered. NPR did a profile of Mattie Clyburn Rice, who passed away in 2014. Now, she was actually the daughter of a Confederate soldier who fathered her late in life, a black Confederate soldier. She was a member of the organization in order to honor the stories that her father told her about being a volunteer in the Army for the Confederates, which by her account were good memories. On a related note, there were a few Jews who were treated kind by the Nazis, but I digress. Mattie was proud to say that 2 of her daughters are members as well. Once again, assimilation is not freedom. She was able to join the organization because she was able to prove that her father received a Confederate pension. The United Daughters of the Confederacy honored her as a real daughter. Only 2 of such black women to receive recognition by an organization that was exclusive to white people. Tokenism at its finest. Proud to venerate the Confederacy because you were treated as an exception, which is supposed to mean that the rule did not exist. She was proud of her recognition, but is being recognized worth disrespecting the past and misinforming the future? Well, the stated purpose of the United Daughters of the Confederacy say, yes, it is. There are plenty of black people in modern America who volunteer for the Confederacy just as some ancestors did. So do not be surprised to see them. It has always been such. That's next week, Off the Top.